when you think about nudges, those gentle pushes that drive our behavior in a particular direction that are done in a way that doesn't stop you from doing other things that you may want to do. Well, we see them designed and tested for very specific situations.
Oh, okay. So you have to test something in a very specific situation if you're going to isolate what's impacting the behavior, right, Kurt?
Right. This is what researchers do. They try to take away as many of the variables as possible to isolate the one thing that they want to study, which is great, but...
But what? What do you mean, but?
Well, we can find out a lot about a particular aspect from studies in a lab setting where they isolate everything away.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that will always work out in the real world.
Yeah. Okay. So for instance, like researchers could identify that one particular nudge intervention drives an increase in a particular desired behavior under ideal situations. But when that nudge is used out in the world, in the wild, as they say, that impact might be lessened or could even disappear.
Right. Because all of those variables that they isolated and got rid of in the lab, guess what? They're actually out there in the real world.
And as we like to say at Behavior Groove's global headquarters, context matters.
Context matters. But what if a nudge could be scalable? In other words, what if we could, as John List, the chief economist from Walmart, might say, give a nudge some voltage to allow it to be more broadly and impact more people? What if we could understand it enough that it works in the wild? It might need some tweaking from situation to situation, but what if that nudge could basically be the same and impact a lot of people?
Well, and that's our big question in this episode today. Are nudges scalable?
Yeah, but Tim, we also talk about vaccine uptake and sleep, right?
Well, yeah, that's the fun part, right? We get to actually explore some real world examples of nudges.
Oh, all right. Welcome to Behavioral Grooves, the podcast that explores our human condition. I'm Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. So if nudges are created for one particular situation, can they be used for different populations of people and in different contexts?
A lot of work has also shown that the impact of behavioral interventions in general is not always the same across contexts. So an intervention that works like in a particular setting might have an impact, but a very similar intervention deployed in a different setting might not work at all.
That's Silvia Saccardo, a newly tenured professor of management at Carnegie Mellon University in the Social and Decision Sciences Department. We met Silvia back in 2019 when we visited CMU for a whole series of conversations with some remarkable researchers that operate there.
Yeah. And by the way, if you're interested in hearing those conversations that we have with these amazing researchers in psychology, economics, and mathematics, you can check out episodes 62 through 69. We got to talk about everything from how to conduct a study with sex workers to women's shoe buying habits as they move from one location to another. It's fascinating stuff. And while we were there, we were really fortunate to have a recorded conversation with George Lowenstein, which was really special. Anyway, it's an outstanding conversation about boredom if you're interested at all in that Carnegie Mellon series.
Okay, an outstanding conversation about boredom. It seems kind of, contrary to like that. But yes, it was. It was fascinating.
It was.
And George is an absolutely brilliant researcher. Okay, Tim, back to Silvia.
Yes.
She published a couple of papers that got our attention recently, and both were based on studies conducted during the pandemic. One was on the use of reminders to encourage people to get COVID-19 vaccine, and the other was on encouraging students to get more sleep.
So they sound really different. Getting a vaccine is really very different from just getting more sleep, right?
Maybe. Yeah, those are those aspects are very, very different. But the idea of using reminders or nudges or cues or even incentives to encourage behaviors, that's what tied them together. And in this conversation with Silvia, you'll hear us talk about how the studies were designed and conducted and the amazing results she and her co-authors got from their work. You'll hear about how someone's past behavior influences their current behavior.
Yeah, duh. Do we really need a study to demonstrate that?
Well, having the scientific data behind a widely held belief gives us greater certainty that it matters, but it also opens up our curiosity to wonder when past behavior doesn't influence current behavior. But that's another episode.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Two things here. One is if you want to hear the entire unedited conversation of our discussion with Silvia, there's a YouTube available. If you're a researcher, you might want to hear all of the specifics about that particular conversation, and you might find it really interesting. So that's available on YouTube. And we've edited some things to kind of make the conversation more concise with Silvia in this particular episode. So just wanted to let everybody know that. And the second thing is that we also talked to Silvia about why she would want Ed Sheeran and Taylor Swift's music on a desert island for a year. I mean, that was kind of mind-blowing.
You might be overstating that one, Tim.
Really?
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Really? Yeah. Okay, Groovers, we encourage you to sit back and relax with some nudge scalability on the rocks and enjoy our conversation with Silvia Saccardo.
Silvia Saccardo, welcome back to Behavioral Grooves.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be back.
Thank you. It's so good to see you. We need to know, because the last time that we talked, you said that you preferred coffee over tea. But how about this? Do you prefer wine over beer?
It's an hard one. It depends on what food I eat.
Okay.
So one thing that I prefer beer with pizza than wine with pizza. And that's an Italian thing. Italians usually go for beer.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I guess overall probably wine.
Could you imagine having
pizza and beer?
Can you imagine having beer with pasta?
No.
No.
Beer doesn't go with pasta.
Okay, good to know.
Okay, Silvia, would you prefer to learn a new language or a new instrument?
That's a hard one. I will go with what's easier probably for me. It's going to be a new language than a new instrument.
Okay.
How many languages do you know?
Not many. Italian and English. So
that's one more than me. There you go.
Okay, so here's the third speed round question. Can an immediate incentive help someone improve their sleep?
I will say yes, and I'll tell you more about it in a bit.
We are definitely going to talk more about that. Absolutely.
And then the last of our speed round questions, and again, we might be talking about this one later too. Yes or no, are nudges scalable?
Yes, but you have to, it's complicated.
I love it because we put yes or no in there because we're going, yeah, that's not always going to be the case. There's a maybe in there, right? There's sometimes. Yes. All right. Well, we will talk about all of, or at least those last two. We won't necessarily go back into language and wine or beer, although we might get to wine and beer again. But you have a couple of papers that we're going to talk about today. So let's start with the one on nudge scalability, right? Sure. So again, nudge is scalable. So you said, yes, but there's something in there. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about the paper that you wrote? Actually, before we even begin that, let's just, for those listeners, most of you probably know what a nudge is, but what's a nudge? What's the definition of a nudge?
Yeah, and actually the paper, it's more about behavioral interventions more broadly. So interventions that are, that leverage insights from psychology and economics to change people's behavior. So a nudge, I guess, will not use incentive, right? It's not an incentive. It will be like a gentle intervention. I guess we are broader in our paper, but there has been a lot of buzz around nudges and behavioral interventions in general in recent years. So for example, there have been when COVID started and we wanted to get people to get vaccines, a lot of behavioral scientists have said okay, we can contribute to the pandemic response and moved on to do research on that. And there have been several large RCTs and randomized controlled trials testing interventions. And for example, some work has shown that paying people incentives, right? Just small, the equivalent of 20 euros would increase COVID-19 vaccination. So there is a paper in Science, by a variety of authors that shows led by Campo Mercadis et al., that shows that offering incentives in Sweden increased COVID-19 vaccination. However, there was another trial that came out a bit later in California showing that incentives as high as $50 had no impact at all on vaccination. Take another intervention, which will be sort of is the focus of my work, which is reminders. So we have seen reminders is a very popular nudge. We have seen a lot of work using reminders in a variety of settings. There is work, including my own, showing vaccination, leveraging reminders could increase vaccinations, could be effective for promoting COVID-19 vaccinations or like influenza vaccinations. And I've done that, a study on that in the early stages of the pandemic, vaccine distribution in the US. However, a study that came out a bit later using very similar reminders, still in the US, found zero impact of no impact of reminders of vaccination. Which, so then when are these interventions effective? When do they work? When they don't work? Sort of understanding that seems important.
Yeah. So that gets to your part where you said it's contextual in when they use it. But this also gets then to the scalability part of this, right? Because if they are contextual, maybe they're not as scalable as we can. So what leads to some of the scalability, or what did you find? First off, tell us a little bit about the paper that you did, and then let's get into what you found.
Sure. So when you think about is an intervention scalable, maybe you want some initial proof of evidence, and then you will then roll it up at a larger scale. There is work suggesting that when deploying intervention at scales, the effect sizes tend to be smaller. So there is this, what John List calls a voltage drop. He has a book about that, the voltage effect. And so that's, again, part of my interest in trying to understand, okay, so what are things that both researchers and policymakers and practitioners in general should consider before thinking of scaling an intervention. And my paper goes through two main lessons about factors to take into account. So I'm happy to walk you through those lessons or just give you a summary.
Yeah. Start with, what were you hoping to discover in that research, right? Because there's a couple parts to it, but what was your hypothesis?
So one hypothesis that we had is that, and that has been built throughout our series of papers, is that nudges or these light touch interventions might be more effective among people who are already motivated to do a given behavior, to engage in a given behavior. So if you think about the path to behavior change, you might first this is a oversimplification, but you might first need to elevate somebody's intentions to engage in a behavior. And then, we know a lot of work on the intention action gap suggests that even if you have an intention to do the behavior, there might still be barriers to it, procrastination, frictions, and other type of behavioral barriers.
But there are those who don't have those barriers. There's those people who seem to not suffer from those kinds of friction points, right?
Fair. I'm thinking on average, the population will have, right? But agree. And understanding what barrier, what is the barrier is super important. And this, I was saying, it's a simplification of the problem. What in particular, we got curious about this question because our particular paper that shows reminders work in promoting COVID-19 vaccinations, in a different context, very similar reminders did not seem to work. So we became interested. Could it be because of the population motivation? Could it be that reminders might be effective? Because reminders are a nudge that really targets the second stage, right? You might want to do the behavior, but still there might be some barrier. Maybe you forgot, right? Maybe you
the intention action,
Exactly. Exactly. And so, the idea that our hypothesis was, okay, maybe reminders are more effective for people who are already motivated. And then we use we think one proxy for this what we call baseline motivation. So the baseline motivation in the population. So what we do is like we look at one proxy, which is just the overall take-up of a given behavior in the control condition of a given RCT. So we just focus on large-scale randomized control trials that have control conditions and some treatment conditions. And if you look at the literature, some randomized control trials have a very, very low take-up of the behavior to begin with, just like maybe 2% of the people in the sample does the behavior. And in others, it's like how much higher, like 50%. And we think that the very low take-up is a proxy for having low motivation in the population overall.
Okay.
So then we look at this data and we see that there is a curvilinear relationship between take-up in the control condition and treatment effects, how much the impact of a particular intervention, such that the impact of behavioral intervention is very small and close to zero in trials that have a very low baseline take-up at baseline. And then this goes up to a certain level, because you can think like when the take-up, when the uptake is very, very high, right? Like 90% of the people already does the behavior, then again, it becomes very hard to move. So that's our first, like, correlational piece of evidence on these. And then what we did is, let's go to our own research on COVID-19 vaccinations and reminders for COVID-19 vaccination, and see whether we can find evidence that different levels of baseline motivations in our population could lead to a differential effect of nudges. And so the first thing, so let me tell you about this trial. So what we did during COVID, at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, we collaborated with, and we is myself and my amazing co-author, Heng Chen Dai. We collaborated with a large healthcare provider in California, UCLA Health, and designed 2 randomized control trials to promote vaccinations, COVID-19 vaccinations, so to promote the first dose of the vaccine. And what we did, so the hospital, back then, I don't know if you remember, at the beginning of the vaccine distribution in 2021, there was this staggered distribution. So first it was high-risk people, and then high-risk professions and educators, and then the general population. And so we were able to start running the studies very early on, at the beginning of February 2021, when the vaccines were being distributed to high-risk individuals. And the hospital was emailing patients as soon as they became eligible to get vaccinated. So not only eligible by the state, like because being high risk, but also like as deemed by the hospital, because supply wasn't huge. So there was this staggered distribution in batches. Whenever a batch of patients became eligible, we randomized them to, so everybody received, a message from the hospital, like an email saying like vaccines are available, you can schedule your appointment. And then one day later, we randomized these patients to either a control group who did not receive anything, or a reminder group. And the reminder, we had different versions of the reminder, but I'll talk about the main effects or the average effect of a reminder. The reminder told patients like, okay, we are UCLA Health, vaccines are available for you. We had different versions, like claim your dose of the vaccine or just like book an appointment. One important thing that the reminder did is provide people with a direct link to scheduling an appointment, so that they could click and go immediately to schedule, to remove any friction related to like finding the venue, like going on, like
exactly, yeah.
And what that paper found is these reminders increased vaccinations at UCLA Health, which is where we ran the study, by 2.8 percentage points, which is a solid like increase. They increased appointments as well, and so we were super excited. We wrote the paper very quickly. The paper ended up being published in Nature. Okay, so what do we do in this paper on scalability? We look at the full sample, and because people were, every time there was a new batch of patients eligible, they were randomized. So this batch was randomized to treatment and control. So we have a lot of batches, so a lot of mini experiments with thousands of patients each. So these RCTs have over 100,000 patients. Each batch has some overall uptake of vaccinations in the control condition, and those baseline willingness to get vaccinated varies across those batches. So again, this idea that maybe these batches have more motivated patients, and that therefore the reminder has a larger effect. And then we can take it a step further, and we ask, like, what are proxies for being motivated to get vaccinated? Then if people get the flu vaccine, they might also be more willing to take the COVID vaccine. There is some research in the literature. There is prior influenza vaccination actually is predictive of COVID vaccination intentions. And so we can look at the vaccination history of the patients in our trials, and look at the impact of reminders, right, among people who have gotten a flu vaccine in prior seasons, the prior 2 seasons versus not. And what we see is that nudges have a much larger, even almost double the effect size among patients with an history of flu vaccination as opposed to patients without.
Oh, I was just going to, so I think that's really interesting because there's implications from this, right? As we think about this from a general health system perspective and what health systems can do in order to uptake the rate of vaccination, understanding prior motivation to be vaccinated will have a big impact. Have you looked into what the implications of this are for what it means moving forward? Because obviously, as we think about this, what are some of those thoughts?
Yes. So, and Hengcheng and I are doing a lot of work in the space. We actually just received funding from NSF to build on this research. So one thing that we learned from this is that, well, you can try to use the history, let's say in the healthcare context, but you could do it in other domains too, right? But like past behavior seems to be predictive, right? And so you could try to use historical data to predict which individuals will have higher baseline motivation to do a particular activity, say vaccinations. And then maybe those patients might just need a nudge, right? Other people might need more heavy-handed interventions. We have a paper. This paper is led by Lana Brody, a PhD student at UCLA Health, and it's done in collaboration with Hengcheng and as well as the Behavior Change for Good initiative, so led by Katie and Angela. A nudge will not move the low-motivated people, like in our paper. But then a more heavy-hand, so in that experiment, as part of a reminder still, we have some reminders include a video that explains the importance of getting the flu vaccine and the risks of the flu. And so attempts to target the first stage of behavior change, trying to elevate intention. And we see that on average, that video doesn't do anything. But if you look at the motivated people, they don't need it. They are already bought in, right? They want to get vaccinated. But if you look at people who haven't gotten flu vaccines in the past, then that video elevates both vaccination intention, so they say that they want to get the vaccine, and also vaccination behavior as measured by, do they get vaccinated a few days later.
It's fantastic. Yeah, it's fantastic what you guys are doing. And do you and Hengcheng anticipate follow-up studies to start to look at these two segregated groups?
Yeah, we have a variety of studies that we are running now with UCLA Health in the context of preventive screenings. Like things like getting your annual PCP visit, but also getting colon cancer screening, all sorts of cancer screening.
All
and
kinds.
We are trying to build on these ideas and see, can we customize interventions? Can we get from patients' historical data, get some sort of a better proxy for baseline motivation and see. So we are following up on it.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing, and then correct me if I'm misunderstanding this, is this idea of scalability. Yes, these interventions can be scalable, but they're more powerful when you customize based upon some of this information. So again, understanding motivation, understanding intentions. Now I can segregate what type of messages, what type of intervention goes to which person.
Yes. And I don't
be
think,
able to do that.
Exactly. Yes. And I think we're not the first to say this. And every behavioral science researcher knows, like, the first step is understanding the barriers, right? But I think thinking there has been a lot of discussion of we need to better understand the heterogeneous effects of nudges, among whom do they work best. And in many cases, it's like, oh, in this particular study, we see, age matters. And it's hard to find something that could be predictive across studies. And we think this construct of baseline motivation could be powerful. But again, we are like following up on this research and trying to understand it more.
Well, this is part of the articulating the map. I'm thinking of a conversation we had with Linnea Gandhi about trying to identify the places where things are working and where things are not working. And the better we understand the map where the water meets the shore, along all of these different interventions and the different populations will help us design better interventions in the future.
Yes, and I love Linnea's work, of course. Yes, and so I'm very much into this idea of, let's try to understand. And in our work, obviously, we try to look at multiple proxies. So one other proxy we have is we know that political affiliation for COVID, right, might be like, so can we get proxies for that? We look at where patients zip codes, so like where patients live. Do they live in zip codes that on average voted for a Democratic versus Republican candidate in the prior elections? And so we see that, again, like similar idea when patients living in districts or zip codes that supported the Democratic candidate in the 2020 election, Joe Biden, the impact of nudges is larger. When it's the Republican candidate, no impact of nudges. So again, imperfect proxies, but we are trying to look at it from multiple angles.
But it's understanding what those proxies are and looking for the different proxies and being able to do that in an effective way, given the information that we have. I love it. Let's move on to the next study. So you did another study. This was on the impact that reminders have on getting a regular amount of sleep. Can you tell us a little bit about, or help us understand that? I don't know if I summarized that correctly or not.
Sure. This is a multi-year randomized controlled trial that we did at the University of Pittsburgh in collaboration with Jose Giuntella, a health economist from University of Pittsburgh, and Charlie Sado from UC San Diego. And we just started with the idea, what is the impact of sleep for performance, right? Lots of work suggesting that, sleep is super important for learning and memory consolidation. There is a lot of correlational evidence suggesting that it has an impact for performance in a variety of domains. There are obviously lab sleep studies suggesting that sleep is important for cognitive function, studies, quasi-experimental studies that leverage some causality, like differences in time zone or differences in school start time, find an impact of sleep on performance, but very, very little work on interventions designed to improve sleep.
Right.
So what did we do? We started with this idea, okay, how can we improve sleep? And we are focusing on college students. Our goal ultimately is, two goals: improving sleep, and how can we do that? And then hopefully with getting people to sustain improvement of sleep, right? So not just during the intervention period, but also when the intervention ends. And then the second goal was, okay, let's look at the impact of sleep on performance, in particular academic performance. So what did we do? We designed these randomized controlled trials where we enrolled participants to a semester-long study. We gave them Fitbits, so wearable trackers that could measure their sleep accurately. And we developed smartphone app from scratch to actually connect to the Fitbit, get the data in real time, and deliver feedback, and also deliver, basically we used it to deliver our interventions. And we looked at the literature on habit formation and are building, we decided to build on the idea of cue rewards. So habits, there is this general idea that habits tend to form when individuals are presented with consistent cue. And if they then do the behavior and the behavior is rewarded, over time, this association between cue and reward will become sort of automatic, so that we could remove the reward and leave the cue there and hopefully get the behavior to continue. So first of all, we measure sleep for a couple of weeks before the beginning of the intervention to get a baseline sleep. And after that, when the intervention started, every night for 4 weeks on weeknights, participants would start to receive at night a cue to go to bed. The cue included a personalized bedtime goal that was calculated based on their baseline sleep. So it was an hour earlier than usual. And the cue, so this reminder, included that, and included prompt to engage in a bedtime behavior that people pre-selected at the beginning of the study. So they committed every night before going to bed, I will do this. It could be something as silly as turn off your phone, the last thing before going to bed, or listen to your meditation app, or a variety of things. And so every night they receive these, remember to do this behavior and go to sleep by this time in order to sleep at least 7 hours by 9 a.m., which is what we incentivize. Why by 9 a.m.? Why 7 hours? Because it's recommended guidelines. Yeah. And why by 9 a.m.? Because we didn't want them to sleep in and move, skip classes, right? And then in the morning, this is our main intervention. So in the morning, if people slept 7 hours, they will get a notification in the app saying, good job, you slept 7 hours. And now you can redeem your reward. And by 3 p.m. that day, they will be Venmo'd, you have Venmo, they will receive a reward of $4. 75 cents.
So not it wasn't a get rich quick scheme, but it was still a reward. It was meaningful to a college student.
So it's almost $5, and it's every day, right? So so not a huge reward, of course. Many questions will bigger rewards have larger impacts, or can you scale it down and have even smaller rewards? We don't know that. That's the reward we settled on. And every night they will then do this. If they if participants did not meet their sleep goal, they will get sad face and encouragement, try again tonight. And so that continued for 4 weeks, at the end of which we told them, okay, now we're going to remove the reward. And we kept measuring their behavior. Most of our participants kept receiving the reminder at night, but no reward.
But you told them you were getting rid of the rewards. You said,
yeah, we told them
you're not going to get this cash payment every day, but you're still going to get the cue. So it was very upfront. There was nothing. It was very clear to them. I think that's a really interesting part of the study.
Right. It was very clear. They knew it in advance. They knew the intervention would last 4 weeks. So, okay. Yeah. And then we removed it, kept measuring. So this is our main intervention. What do we find? So we have a control group that received the Fitbit, and we just measured throughout. And compared to the control group, we see that the intervention increases sleep. So our main dependent variable is the share of nights with more than 7 hours of sleep. That increases by 12 percentage points during treatment. We also see the in terms of sleep amount, because that's what has been used mainly in the literature, we increase sleep on average, by about 20 minutes. So
Wow.
at baseline, people slept about 6 hours, 40 minutes, and then we get them to 7 hours, basically, on average. And then what we find is that it's driven by bedtime, in the sense that bedtime is so late among college students. Do you want to guess what's the average bedtime?
Well, you said up by 9, 7 hours. So my quick math is some 2 a.m.
Yeah,
somewhere
so like
in there.
on average, right? Like the average is 1:20 or something around that.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah, it's like it's really late.
I am well asleep by 1:20 most nights. So yes.
And they basically go to bed earlier during the intervention period.
That's good.
When we remove the incentives, as other work on habit formation, we see like a decrease, right? In this, so the share of nights with more than 7 hours of sleep stays higher than baseline, but not by 12 percentage points, more like 5.6, like something like that, percentage points. So there is a reduction. Sleep on average in the post period increases by, it's larger than baseline period, and larger than control by about 9 minutes. So we still have some effects. And you have to think it's not only 9 minutes, but it's every night, right? So
average 9 minutes. Yeah.
So it is, and it's the 20 minutes, but it's like it's average, and it's like some extra sleep every night, right, over the course of our intervention.
That's fantastic. That's amazing that they're still getting 9 more minutes of sleep, which I think a neuroscientist would argue is good, right, for cognitive comprehension and cognitive abilities. That extra 9 minutes with just the cue is going to continue to help them.
Right. So this is the great news. Now, is it really driven by this cue reward intervention that we built? Yeah. We had secondary treatments, so with a smaller sample, because our funder, like, we had to have a large sample for the main treatment, but then we wanted to understand mechanism a bit better, so we have secondary treatments. So what we can say from these treatments, we have to take with a grain of salt because of the smaller sample size, but we have variations that only use the cue, so no rewards. So the cue was from the beginning to the end, right? And more interesting also, we vary 2 other things. So one is if there is the cue and there is the reward, our treatment delivered the reward that day. So we made the reward immediate. But we have a version where people got the feedback immediately, but the rewards all at the end. And then we also have a version where we are like, okay, forget all of this infrastructure and just tell at the beginning you will get this for $75 reward, but give all of the reward at the end, no feedback, no remind, no cue, nothing. So our idea was let's see whether this infrastructure that builds on the idea of cue and reward does better than giving all of the rewards at the end, right? In terms of during the intervention, but also most importantly for habit formation, because the idea of cue and reward, it's really important for establishing habits.
Yeah.
What do we find? We find that all treatments improve sleep, even the cue on its own. So that's good news. But during the intervention, the one that has the largest impact is the immediate incentive treatment. So there is a benefit of using this infrastructure with immediate rewards. So what we call immediate incentive, it's really cue, reward, and the reward comes immediately. However, when we remove the incentive in the post-treatment period, we don't find any statistically distinguishable differences between any of the treatments.
Wow.
And if anything, if we just, and we should take it with a grain of salt, but just look at the point estimate, just without looking at significance, the point estimate for the treatment where incentives were given at the end and nothing else, no cue, nothing, is the same as the one of the immediate incentive treatment for habit formation for post-treatment period. So it doesn't seem, at least in our test, that really the cue and reward help with the persistence of habits more than just giving rewards at the end of the semester.
So the immediate rewards increase while the rewards were being given, increase the sleep behavior, the desired sleep behavior. Long term, however, rewards at the end versus rewards immediately, not a statistical significance. So when we think about that, and so given just the cues without any rewards, was the rewards, did that help overall?
Overall, so it has a small impact, but sort of persistent over time. I guess it also diminishes a bit. So like there is some habituation to like people might, after a while, right? But it's much small. Even the improvement during the intervention, it's much smaller than offering incentives.
Yeah. Well, and you teed up this idea that there are implications around a whole bunch of things that are habitual, that are routine, that this could influence. Are there any areas that you think have the greatest potential for studying this and including these kinds of interventions?
Well, you had talked about academic performance. Is there,
our second part of the paper is like, okay, we were able to increase sleep. Is there an impact on performance, right? There is this paper in India that doesn't find an impact of nighttime sleep. They find a small impact of naps, but nothing on nighttime sleep. So we look at academic records, and what we find is that participants in our main intervention, the immediate incentive treatment, have a higher GPA. So we increase the treatment increases GPA by 0.75 to 0.88 grade points, which is a 0.10 to 0.11 standard deviation increase in sleep, which is a non-trivial improve. Not in sleep, sorry, in GPA.
In GPA,
yeah.
In GPA.
That's big.
Yeah, and then we do, because some of the courses people take are, some are lectures with grades and so on. Some are like, internships or, these seminar courses. And those on average have a very, very high, like it's impossible to move because it's already very high GPA on average. So when we look, it's mainly driven by lectures. So like if we just look at lecture alone, we have an even higher, like slightly larger estimate. Also, our study spanned COVID, and in particular, in 2020, spring 2020, our students were enrolled in the study. Most of the intervention was before the COVID pandemic exploded in the US, right? And campus closed eventually, right? Closed and sent students back home. And the second part of the semester was remote. So we have that semester where it was like a huge disruptions. We have a separate paper where we look at all of these disruptions among students. In that semester, we see a lot of grade inflation. So grades are higher. So we do sensitivity checks. What happens if we remove the COVID semester, and our estimates are also become even a bit larger.
Wow.
Yes, and then we do some sort of cost effectiveness analysis, and we see that our estimates are really in the ballpark of the increases that we see with this type of interventions, but are much more cost effective because instead of costing like thousands of dollars per participant, on average they cost about $110 per participant for a semester, which if it replicates, it's very exciting. So our next step will be does this scale? Obviously.
There you go. Context and everything else. So what I'm taking away from all of this is that my 18-year-old who's going off to college next year, I need to pay him in order to get some sleep. Is that what, I need to figure out a way to make sure that he gets his sleep.
Well, you could incentive, you could pay a tutor, or maybe just pay him some sleep, right?
But if I'm being cost effective and want the same effect, right? I mean, I can figure out $100 to get him to sleep better, as opposed to a tutor for the entire year. There you go.
I had the idea for this, to study sleep, right? I was like, you saw my last podcast. I was working mainly on dishonesty and so on. But when I started as an assistant professor at CMU, I was assigned to teach a 9 a.m. class. And it was a class on behavior change. And one of the questions I was asking my students is like, what is the number one behavior you would like to change? And almost everybody was, I want to sleep more, and this class is too early. And so that gave me the idea, we should look into this.
Yeah. Or maybe that's it. Maybe I'll just tell them, don't have any classes starting before noon. There you go.
Yeah.
It is fascinating, right? What the economic decision-making, sort of that decision-making model goes into the development of habits and routines. I think that this is kind of fascinating about why this tiny little incentive is enough to get a college student who has a lot of things going on in their life. I mean, if they're up until 1:20 in the morning, they're busy with a lot of stuff. And it was enough of an intervention to change their decision-making about when I'm going to bed.
Yeah, you didn't ask me, like, what are they doing less of, right? They're increasing sleep, right? Are they studying less?
That's a great question, yes.
So I can tell you that if you want.
Yes.
We measure time use. So every week we ask them, like, what did you do in the next 24 hours in 30 minutes increments? So we can classify, right, like in categories. And we see that what they do less of is screen time. So time on, video games, like watching TV, streaming, on the web, and so on. Especially screen time at night. They go to sleep earlier, but screen time at night, that's what they give up. We don't see they study less, but this is super exploratory. We didn't hypothesize it as anything. Yeah. What we see that they change when they study. So they study more in the morning. So they which I have and I don't even know if it will replicate. So take it with a grain of salt. But this data set, so I think it's an interesting fact that we might want to explore more.
Yeah,
No, I find that it's interesting, and again, I'm extrapolating out to an N of 1 with an 18-year-old in my house who's still in high school, right? To get him off of screen at night would be fantastic.
So maybe the $5 we paid might do.
maybe I just need hey, I'll pay you $5 if you're done by 10. There you go. So
Silvia, we always love to talk about music, and we have to find out. And your musical tastes change as your children grow. We know that we've had that influence as well. But let's take this from the perspective of, let's say that you get to be on a desert island for a year, just you, nice and peace and quiet, and you get to take 2 musical artists with you.
Yeah. I don't know. I can't tell you 2. I was preparing for 1.
You were preparing for 1. Okay. All right. Well, let's start with 1.
Because my life has been and I know I will disappoint you because it's probably anyway, I've been I'm in my big Taylor Swift era. So that's what I'm listening to, most of the time.
Okay. That's okay.
So I know I was going to disappoint you.
Taylor is, so my daughter is a Swiftie.
I know,
we have, it's it's
nothing to be embarrassed about.
Yes. And she's a great artist.
Yeah.
What's your favorite era?
What's my favorite? I think I like the Lover era a lot.
Okay.
But I also like the Midnight era. I recently got tenure, and I was like, my own gift to myself is gonna go to the concert.
Congratulations!
So I'm looking forward to go to their concert in Milan this summer.
Oh, in Milan!
Wow!
I'll be there for
that will be fantastic.
The holidays with the kids.
Yeah, you'll see family and all that kind of stuff.
Family.
Yeah. Wow! Well, congratulations on getting tenure. That's terrific.
Thank you.
That's huge. We've spent enough time around the halls of Carnegie Mellon University where we know that that's not a slam dunk. That that it's a hard milestone to achieve. So congratulations.
Yeah, I found out recently. It's very exciting.
It is.
Well, congratulations on that. All right, so Taylor Swift, you're bringing. I know you only prep for 1, but who else comes to mind? Is there any other?
I feel judged. I don't know. Ed Sheeran.
Don't feel
Ed
judged.
Sheeran. That's great.
Oh,
that's totally great. We oftentimes have this discussion with people who are wildly diverse in the way that they choose, right? I would kind of put Ed Sheeran and Taylor Swift sort of closer together,
Yeah, I would think so. No?
I don't.
You don't think so? I think
they're both kind of poppy.
Yeah.
All right. I see where you're going with that, but I'm just
didn't choose.
They're very different in their in like lyrical kind of components and some of the musical ways that they're.
Well, you didn't go to Pavarotti or Bocelli or
I know. I was gonna disappoint you.
With that, I will say yes, but within the pop genre, they're not necessarily,
Italy has this big music festival every year in February, like Sanremo, where new artists come up, and so I was like, oh, maybe I'll find a new, for example, there is this Italian rock band that I like, Maneskin. Have you heard of them?
Yeah.
Oh, you should listen to them. They're
Danish name of an Italian rock group that sings in English for most of the time. I always love it.
So they won that festival. They became huge, and they won the Eurovision festival, so the European, and then are touring the international tour. So very different from Taylor Swift or Ed Sheeran. But this year I was gonna look for a new, but I haven't really this year. I didn't find anybody I really liked that much.
That's okay. That's totally okay. Silvia Saccardo, it is always a pleasure to see you. It's great to talk to you about the fantastic research that we're doing. We're grateful that you were a guest today on Behavioral Groups.
Welcome to our grooving session where Tim and I share ideas on what we learned from our discussion with Silvia, have a free-flowing conversation, and groove on whatever else comes into our scalable brains, Mr. Houlihan. Scalable. We are scaling our brains up.
In the wild, no less.
In the wild. We're scaling it so we can be brilliant science communicators.
I think so. I'd like to aspire to that. I would
like to aspire to that. We're a long ways away. We need to get some more specificity around how we do this, and we need to have more precision, as we will talk about in our grooving session.
We are going to talk about that. Hey, but before we get to that, I think there's some things that we should clear up from a terminology perspective. I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page on a couple of things. So, like a nudge, we started to talk about what is a nudge with Silvia, and I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page, as we say. A nudge is any intervention that alters someone's behavior in a predictable way, but without two things. So all the options must be open, meaning you can choose anything, and there's no economic incentive. Basically, to count as a mere nudge, the intervention needs to be easy and cheap, and you can opt in or opt out, but the nudge just needs to be simple and be without any kind of economic incentive.
Right. And so an incentive is kind of like a heavy-handed nudge, but it's not a nudge because there is the incentive aspect of it.
Perfect.
Right?
Yeah.
But incentives enhance desirability or can act as a motive for specific behavior. Money and social norms are common incentives. So even when we think about incentives, if there's not a monetary component associated with it, there can be a social or common norm aspect that is associated with it.
Right.
And technically, according to some researchers, any type of incentive is not a nudge because they use that real financial consequences on that.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so the other one, here's another one. Silvia talks about uptake. And I just want to make sure everybody understands that uptake is about adopting a particular behavior during a study.
Right.
When she talks about uptake, it's just an example of this is the percentage or the portion of the population that did the behavior.
Yeah. And for researchers that are or our listeners who are not researchers, there's a couple organizations or journals that she talks about. One is NSF, which is the National Science Foundation. That's a big deal. A grant from the NSF implies that the work is really important. So for all of the non-researchers, that's not just some throwaway kind of thing. This is a big deal. And then Nature, which is one of the premier, I think is it one of the top three? Aren't there three?
Absolutely.
The three big ones, Nature,
It's right at the top.
Science, and I forget what the other one is. But it's one of those. And it is the premier magazine for peer-reviewed papers across social and biological sciences. So,
yeah. So let's level set. God, I hate using all this office jargon, but
we level set it there. We're scaling people's brains. That's what we're doing.
Okay. So the question is, can a nudge be scaled?
Yeah. So lots of studies indicate that many findings of research, actually, drum roll, are not scalable. In other words, that they have problems with replication. They have problems when they get to beyond the lab, as we talked about in the intro, that the isolated impact doesn't have the same degree of behavior change when it's confounded with all of the other factors that are going on and various different pieces. So, yeah.
Or I think about like the studies that were done on cortisol, that stress hormone in our bodies, that people in the United States and Europe get a lot of cortisol in their system right before they have a public speaking thing, but not in Kenya. Because there's this big cultural thing in Kenya that just says, oh, we love public speaking. That's a fantastic thing. Everybody loves to do public speaking. So you can't just automatically say that when you put someone in a public speaking situation, they're going to be stressed, because it's not universal.
Right. And we know a lot of the research is done in the weird, right? Western, educated,
industrialized
R&D. I forget what they are now.
Rich and democratic
study. So again, in the global South and other types of cultures and different social norms, do these hold up? We don't know. We also know a lot of studies are done with, or have been in the past, done with college students and, an easy sample size. That, as my son the other day, when I was trying to explain this study to him, he said, well, did they do the studies only at one college, or did they, do some? And then I was like, I told him, well, it's a couple that we, and he, well, were they any in the Midwest, and it's like, oh my God, I've created a monster. But, part of the issue is that we read these papers, or we get the headlines from them, and we generalize the results all of the time, so that it is not just about this happened in this situation with these controls, and this was the outcome. We go, oh, do X, get Y. And that's not how it works.
Exactly. Silvia brought up John List, as she actually mentioned him. And we talked to John in episode 296, by the way, about the voltage effect, about the idea of scalability. And John goes on, in a fair amount of detail, where in his thesis is nudges can be scalable if you go through the right process to get to scalability, right? And I think what we have to say here is that what Silvia and her co-authors did was show that it's not just about doing the right things in advance, but it's about the precision of the implementation.
Right. And so when we think about, again, going back to the COVID study and thinking about the sleep studies, what I think from a scalability perspective that is really important on those is understanding when and how the intervention worked, and when it worked better than in other situations. So
right.
What that leads to is, from a scalability perspective, is how can we segment who is receiving the nudge, that it can be one way to be more precise, to have a better precision on the implementation. It could be in the manner in which that nudge is introduced, again, in the sleep study, and kind of adding in some of the incentive aspects of that. Those all change how the impact of the actual intervention. So when we look at this, I think the scalability piece that is really important to take out of this is that the research that people are doing, that Silvia is doing, that many of the other researchers that we're talking to, isn't about just finding out things that are going to be groundbreaking, great, about that we can just automatically apply across all of the different contexts that we live in.
Right.
It's about finding a more precise way of being able to scale those so that they do contain or keep that impact that they had in the lab. And now as we're trying to apply them to policy or to programmatic elements in business or in a college or wherever else, that you can do them with the greatest impact at the least amount of cost.
Yeah. And I thought a great example of that in Silvia's study with the COVID study was that if you just looked at a large population of people and you sent them a reminder, you got a lift in the number of people who would respond positively to get a vaccine. However, when they started to look at that audience more specifically and more analytically, they discovered that people who had a predisposition toward getting a vaccine, well, guess what?
i.e. have already had a vaccine.
Right. Like from the flu or something like that. They were much more likely. And those who had never had a vaccine or had, not recently had a vaccine from the flu or something like that, they were much less likely to respond to the intervention.
But adding the link to a video on the benefits of vaccination, right, increased the uptake among those who had not been vaccinated before, but didn't do anything for those who had been vaccinated.
Yeah.
Again, precision, right? And being able to scale this at where it's going to make an impact. And so what you're being able to do is segment the messaging, segment the methodology, and segment who it goes to in order to get a larger, as John List says, that voltage. You're going to add energy to this. Right.
Well, and so I want to switch over to the sleep study because I think that there were similar things there, right? That they have the queue. She's got the reminder going out with money at first, with an incentive, and then finds that a couple things happen. Most students do respond positively. Right. They start sleeping more, and then that there's this positive effect on GPA, which is a whole wonderful, downstream effect. But when they took the rewards away, the students kind of most of them returned to their old behavior. A few hung on and still slept more.
But no, they still had a lift. They had a lift. They had that lift, right? So, right. So with the reward, what was it? Increased the number of nights with more than 7 hours of sleep by 12%.
Right.
And after the reward is taken away, the number of nights with 7 hours of sleep remained 5.6% higher than the control group.
Yeah. So meaningful. Yes.
So still there, but not the 12%. So it cut in half.
Right.
But you still had this impact. So again, as you're thinking about scaling this, so if I am a university and I want to implement something that my, new college students that are coming in to build better sleep habits, because we know as the GPA is amazing, right? So they showed that there was an increase of 0.752 to 0.83 point increase. That means on a 4-point scale, you go from like a 3.0 to a 3.75 or 3.8. That's huge, right?
That is huge.
So as a college, you're going, yes, I would want that. A, for the benefit of the students, but B, it raises our, how our college is viewed in different pieces if we can get more of that. But understanding that there's a cost to this.
Yeah, it was $110 a student, I think.
$110 a student. Okay.
Yeah.
But if I had to maintain that was done for the length of this, but if I had to maintain that over the course of 4 years, it's going to be much more than that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it looks like, all right, there is an increase. We can start them off with this, invest that, and know that we won't get a 12% increase in sleep, in number of nights that have 7 hours or more, but we will get, after the end of this long term, we will see some lift above that. And then it becomes a cost benefit analysis, right?
Absolutely. one of the things that I loved about Silvia's work was that when students were getting more sleep, the researchers asked the question, well, what are they doing less of? If there's more sleep time and we've only got 24 hours in a day, something is going to give. And what was it that they gave up? It was screen time.
Right.
That was so cool to discover. And again, this is where research is great at isolating specific variables.
Right. And another one is that, hey, they found out that the GPA increase was better on lecture classes as opposed to internships, and seminar courses.
Yeah.
So once again, if I am trying to implement a policy as a university, okay, do I look at what kind of classes students are taking? Because we know that it works better in these lecture type courses. So those, again, it gets to the scalable part. It would be fantastic. And this is, I think, the piece that we started with. If I could just give a nudge and it works all the time and I don't have to customize it and do different things and I get this big result, that is great. But we know that's not how the world works. If it did, we would be, everything would be, unicorns and rainbows. So I think that is one of the really interesting pieces of this. And one of the things that research is really helping to point to, and this is, and again, we can talk about the whole aside of, the replication issues that are going on, but also just this ability for researchers to really want to publish, and to get published, you got to have new novel information and all this stuff. When in reality, research science is an incremental way of looking at the world. Is that in my dissertation, I wanted to change the world when I started, and I had a professor that came to me and said, Kurt, you just have to add a little bit of knowledge to this body of literature that people will be a little bit more informed. And I think we forget that. I think we forget that as researchers, as people who consume that research, we want everything to be this big groundbreaking. If I just do X, I will get Y. When no, it's like a nuance on X, and it helps in understanding how Y happens. And the more that we get, the better off we'll be.
And those matter. That's the cool thing. Those incremental improvements matter.
Yeah.
The last kind of primary thing I wanted to talk about was cues and rewards, because
and cues and rewards matter.
Yeah.
You like that? You like context matters, and now you want cues and rewards matter. Because you wrote that down. That's why I did that.
I like that. Thank you for reading.
Yeah.
So, because Silvia talked about cues and rewards, and just for the sake of history, they were kind of really developed and put out in the real world with B.F. Skinner back in the 1940s and 50s. He was a behavioralist psychologist. So he spent a lot of time studying animals, rats and pigeons and stuff.
And gets a bad rap I think today. I think a lot of people look at, he is
controversial.
He was very outspoken, controversial, very much like either, and again, he missed the cue on a lot of different pieces here about the power of mind and other pieces of that, but you can even go back before Skinner and you go to Pavlov, right? The Russian psychologist who did the work with dogs and did classical conditioning work, whereas Skinner did operant conditioning work. Yep. And you can look at a whole bunch of different pieces on cues and rewards and what they do. So,
and all of it's relevant, but at the heart of it, and I think that what we just want to make sure people understand, the cue is in these studies was the nudge. It's the reminder. It's the thing that happens before the behavior. That's what the cue is. So the reminders were the cues. So Silvia's conversation about that, I just wanted to make sure people understood that a cue in these studies was the reminder itself.
Right. And the reward, again, for those people who did in the COVID, was you were less likely to
get sick,
get sick, or to have, complications from that. And for the sleep, this is the interesting part, because if you look at it, there's probably two different rewards. One was a very immediate extrinsic reward of the monetary component that they got, right? That was the extrinsic immediate reward. And again, I love the study where it was like immediate payout that day or at the end of the semester. And that, again, those are the stuff that
good
get
nuances.
you and me all excited, right?
Yes.
But there was also a reward because they showed that there was that correlation between sleep and GPA. And so that is another aspect of that reward. And so it's really interesting. Tim, talk about the study that Skinner did with, was it chickens?
Oh, he did this really fun, I thought it was really a funny study where he was, I think it was chickens or pigeons. I'm not 100% sure about that, but he was watching them in a cage and they had enough space to kind of move around. And he, like this one group, as soon as they would like turn around twice in the cage, he would hit the light to feed them and let them know that the light was the indicator that there's food coming. And so he conditioned the birds to spin around twice so that they would get food. Like when they got hungry, they were like, okay, I'm going to spin around twice. Yeah. And because I want to get fed. And they thought that was like the magic cue to the machine to light up and give them food.
Yeah.
And of course, the wonderful thing about this is that humans are the same way. Like we make these false attributions about, well, if I did this and then, if I did X and then Y happened, then Y must have happened because I did X.
Yeah.
When might be completely random.
Well, and I mean, we're going to be talking about rituals in an upcoming episode.
Yes.
And, many rituals have their start in some of these types of things. It's think about going to a baseball game and putting a rally cap on. Like I'm turning my hat around backwards. And because, that is going to impact how the baseball players on the field are actually going to perform, and they're going to then win because I turned my hat around backwards or sideways or whatever. But we do that, right? And we know that we are not always rational in these behaviors that we do. And what is really interesting is that we can be conditioned to do them because of random or chance kind of components that come from a reward, right? Yeah. Again, the chicken or pigeon turning around twice and, light and food. Well, you know what? Yeah, I mean, that actually is interesting because that was initially wasn't there, but once they started rewarding it, then it became, part of it. So
that's the operant conditioning thing happening with Skinner. Okay, before we go, Kurt, what is up with the Italian rock group with the Danish name that sings in English?
Måneskin. Yes. Oh, they are fantastic. I'm amazed that you had not listened to them. They're
I have not.
They have some really great music. They won some Eurovision award, which is where I found about them. Yeah. Okay. And they are a rock band. They are just they embody the
rock and roll thing.
Controversial, my daughter loves their music. I listen to their music. It's nice. We transcend. We both jam out to their songs.
Måneskin, huh?
Måneskin,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so they did this cover of what was it? Begging, and was it Four Seasons, Tim?
Four Seasons. Yeah.
Yeah, which is fantastic. Freaking tastic. Can't even talk, but yeah, they're great. So,
okay. Well, I think we should check it out. Everybody should check it out. I promise to check it out. So,
all right, there you go. All right. So we've covered, I think, most of the key points from Silvia's studies. How about we wrap it up? Because, what can we talk about after Måneskin?
Okay, well, that's a fair question. What can you talk about after Måneskin? My closing comment on the conversation is to just express our gratitude to Silvia for just doing the cool work that she's doing, and just to send her a really hearty congratulations on getting tenure at Carnegie Mellon. It's a big deal.
Yeah. It's a really big deal, and it's really cool. And she's done a great job. I remember we got to guest lecture in her course when we were there. That was awesome. Yeah,
it was fun.
Yeah, and she was able to do that while get tenure of teaching and being a mom and living your life. So congratulations, Silvia. We are very happy for you, and keep up the good work.
So with that, Groovers, we hope that you're able to take some of these cool ideas from Silvia and bring them into your life this week, and that you use them to help you find your groove.